no, we'll talk about. I think at the end we'll talk
Yeah,
about it.
remind me to talk about that, because how you in this milieu in Los Angeles, even if you try your best, it's impossible not to be co-opted on some level.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
You can't do it.
Yeah.
I don't go to parties. I don't. These are
Okay.
the pearls you have
We
to.
are
At the
back
time
on.
we had a little. I mean, God, it was so small then. We had a little television office there where the tapes would come in from everywhere, and we would go in the office and watch the tapes together, and that's where we would watch the tapes.
Back on. We're back on.
And there were three of us there. There was another. By the way, there was another guy reviewing television, Jim Brown, who went on to become a very successful soap opera writer, a terrific writer, smart as hell and so funny. And he didn't get that. He wanted the job that I got, and he was younger. I think he was, I don't know. He was younger, and they didn't give it to him. But we got along great. He deserved it. He was terrific. Anyway, so the three of us, there would be Jim Brown and me and Lee Margulies, who was a television writer at the time, who went on to become television editor. And we were all the three minds, with a similar mind. We would go in the television room and have a ball together watching television. We loved SCTV, things that really, I don't know, that we really got off on, and had a great time watching television. There was a lot of camaraderie. But when Cecil wanted to come in and watch a tape, I mean, that was it. He would come in, insert his tape, and we would leave.
Why?
I mean, and he didn't do it at all. You know, it makes it sound worse than it is. It was just sort of, it was his turf, and when he had to watch something he wanted to watch, he would do it. That's all.
And in terms of now, before you were going to the affiliates to watch things, and here you had it here in your office. Did that change the way you work?
Well, it did, because this was the L.A. Times. You know, there was a big difference between the Louisville Times, and it was like between Pluto and Earth. You know, whatever the L.A. Times wanted, it got. Okay, so they would do everything. They would come over and even hand carry it. They would come over and, wash your car with their tongues. I mean, this was the L.A. Times. Had nothing to do with you personally, and that's something you also should always understand. It was the paper you worked for. It had a lot of power because of its huge reach. And this is when the LA Times was in its heyday as one of the very best and most respected and most powerful papers in the country. So anything we wanted, and piles of tapes would come, many more than we could ever watch. And we had a secretary or some kind of a worker there who would send the tapes back or do whatever with them. I don't know. So that was much different. Do you want me to come out to watch at home? Because at home it's a very similar thing. I mean, I got deliveries of tapes and tapes all the time, and once a month I would have the local library come and just pick up the tapes and take them away. I didn't know what to do with them. More tapes than I ever wanted. But because I was who I was with the LA Times, people would send me everything, tapes and tapes and tapes and tapes. I would watch them here. So no more having to go anywhere. On occasion you did it, and I never liked to do it. I never liked to go to screenings because you were watching on a big screen, which is that's different in the way that the public watched it. Television is different on a big screen. Sometimes not as good, sometimes better.
Now, in terms of the tapes themselves, did
Yes.
you ever find yourself rewinding to see a scene again, anything like that, or would you watch it straight through as though you were?
Oh yeah. I mean, there's a whole. This is a very interesting question, and it really speaks to your integrity as a critic in a way, because first of all, you have to always be cognizant that you're watching television in a way different than those who are reading or watching it. Okay, number one, almost always you don't have commercials. Okay, I mean, it's not like on television you could be watching Hamlet and have Hamlet say "to be" and then go to a commercial and come back and have or not to be. I mean, it's only slight hyperbole. So you're watching television differently. You have the benefit of going back and watching it a second time to make sure you understand it. The public doesn't have that benefit. Or if you're tired of watching, you can snooze for 50. You can do all kinds of things. It's a different environment of which you must always be cognizant. And if you're honest as a critic, you in some way find a way to point this out to the public. And I can't tell you the number of times I've watched something without commercials and liked it, and then watched it with commercials, had a much different impression. It just changes the tenor entirely. And so you have advantages, the public. That changes, yes. Yes, you can rewind it. You can do anything you want with it if you don't understand it.
And what about, would you always watch something all the way through? Or if something did not hit you within a certain time period, or would you turn it off and say, I don't need to see any more of
That's
this?
dishonest. I would never do that. I would never, ever, ever, and there are critics who do. I can't stand this anymore. I'm not going to watch it. Because, all art evolves. All performance art evolves. I mean, I've watched things that began badly and really became quite good, and vice versa. I mean, it's only fair to stick through it, and sometimes it's utter torture, I'm telling you, okay? But it's only fair to do it that way. And if you somehow cut it off and then write as if you'd seen the whole thing, that's dishonest. I mean, Roger Ebert did that, not caught, he admitted doing that. He reviewed a movie quite recently and admitted he hadn't seen it all the way through, and he caught hell for it, and rightfully so.
And what about in terms of series? If you wrote, let's say that you were writing about a new series, would you continue to watch the series?
Yeah, the advantage a television critic has that a movie critic has, and it's a wonderful advantage, is when you're writing about series, you can always go back and rewatch something. You can, frequently you have no choice but to review the first episode, which can be a trap, because usually if it's a pilot, more cases than not, it's much better than the series, or it can be much worse. But you have no choice but to review the first show if you are obligated to operate that way. There was a time when I argued against doing this. Okay, I felt it was not right to review the first show because it cannot be representative, and I was argued down, and with some justification, because they felt the public expected this, and everybody else was doing it. We had to do it too. Okay, so so you always have to be cognizant of that it's not necessarily representative of an entire series, and any way you can mention that. And also, if it's a series, go back and look at it again. And it's possible your mind has changed, and my mind changed on some series, and I went back and rewrote and wrote reviews about them after a second or third viewing. And people will say, man, what a great thing to do. And that's very self-serving. People love for you to do that. It's an honest thing to do, and people love for you to do it. They say, God, that Rosenberg, what a guy. Do you see what he did? He admitted he was wrong. But there were series. To me, the funniest series, pound per pound, that's ever been on the air is Seinfeld. I mean, I could watch it 10 times, and I still laugh hysterically. Okay? When I first came on the air, I was very lukewarm. It was only in reruns where I just fell in love with this series. Law and Order was another one. I sort of gave sort of a negative review. I fell in love with it watching reruns. I went back and wrote a very positive review. St. Elsewhere was another series. Might be some others too. Or there's some other, or it's the other way sometimes, where you originally give it a positive review, 24. I loved when it came out. I mean, what a piece of shit it became. And I wrote about it, and it became so informative. It was almost comedic to me. I wrote several columns ridiculing it. But that's the advantage you have as a television critic that a movie critic does not have, usually.
Now, what kind of responses would you get when say, for instance, if you wrote something about St. Elsewhere and didn't like it? Would you get a lot of responses from?
Well, probably in my memory, not of St. Elsewhere not liking it, because it was never that big of a hit. Okay, there were some people who liked it, I can't remember. I mean, I got strong responses to my column. A lot of people didn't like what I wrote, and I felt it was very important to run as many times as I could readers' columns without any response from me. It's always been my firm belief that we in the media so frequently get the last word. There should be moments when the public gets the last word. Even if we feel that they're completely wrong, it doesn't make any difference. They should get the last word. And that's something else I've criticized television for, because that's very infrequently the case of television. They very infrequently give you the last word. Or if they do, they come back and they try to top you, make fun of what you said. So yes, I've got frequently got very strong responses, and there are times, some of them I felt were not well founded. Some of them were founded. There are times when I learned from some of my negative letters, where people mention things to me that sort of open my own eyes. And you can always learn from your criticisms, from your own critics. I can't remember specific criticisms I've got of those columns, but I'm sure I did. I got a lot of responses.
Was there one that just went through over the top in terms of the amount of response you got?
The most responses I ever got? Oh, yeah. It was right after 9/11. I did, 2 days after, I did a column on George Bush, not conveying what I considered a presidential presence during this time of crisis. And it wasn't about his policies. That was my mandate was not to write about George Bush's policies, but it was about to write about him as he communicated to the country through the public. And ironically, it was a suggestion by my editor at the time, a man named John Montorio, who has since been fired. Anyway, but I thought it was a good idea because if I didn't, I wouldn't have done it. I had that kind of clout then not to do it. And I wrote about it. I was very critical of Bush, and all hell broke loose. I must have gotten, 1,500, 2,000 emails. We're in the email, time now. And 90% of them, not just critical of me, very, very, very angry at me. Many death threats, people saying, I've got a bullet for the back of your head, watch your back, Rosenberg, blah, 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 blah. And I'd gotten lots of criticism all the time, and I always felt like, if you can't dish it out, you got to accept it. And I always did, and I always liked to print the criticism and take it for what it was worth and try to have a thick skin about it. But this really bothered me because it really showed me that at that point in time, you could not say anything that was even remotely critical of the president or anything he did, because you would be accused of being unpatriotic. Something Bill Maher learned a little later when he criticized the president on a much larger scale than what I did. And you just couldn't do it. And it was really a scary thing. Even people who had liked me before, it was really, so nothing more than that. I'd gotten lots of criticism. I got letters sometimes that were like amazing. People threatening my life from afar, coming from city to city, coming to get me. And maybe I should have been scared. I never was. It was almost comical to me. Amazingly, though, very few letters ever criticizing me or hitting me for being Jewish, which is so surprising. Occasionally you get those kind of people. Oh, you're people. That's what you would say. But it was just people for, not liking Donny Osmond or something like that. What people get mad at is just amazing.
Let's go back a little bit and talk about you had mentioned about screening all the tapes and stuff.
Yeah.
Were there ever times that you couldn't get a tape from a show or a network that was embargoed?
Well, the only time we couldn't get a tape from a show was when usually it meant that they just didn't want anybody to write about it ahead of time. They thought it was so bad. They were so scared of what you might write, and occasionally that would happen. So you wouldn't have. So the world wouldn't end, and you'd write about it afterwards, or it was done so late. Putting it together, they couldn't even put it together in any way, shape, or form that you could watch it. But frequently, you got rough cuts, and you had to learn to make allowances for that. I mean, very rough cuts. And there's sometimes, I would learn, as any critic would, to make allowances for that. Sometimes so rough I would refuse to watch them. This whole thing about a temporary soundtrack or a temporary music track, it can make a big difference in music. Things like that. I just didn't think it was fair to review it. But it was rugged, if the acting was rugged, if there were, dialogue to come things on the screen or something like that, that wouldn't bother me too much.
Were you normally able to get final episodes of shows, surprise endings, that kind of thing?
Do you get final episodes for? Well, it depends on the shows.
Like the new hard episode, the ones that were really very embargoed. Were you able to get those?
The
last episode of Newhart, for instance.
Last episode, I don't remember about the last episode of Newhart, but usually you're able to get them unless it's something like The Sopranos today, where they felt that there was something so special about the ending, they could not trust, critics not to blow it. Probably with some justification, but we were almost able to get that, and consequently, I've been exposed. And the whole idea of, I think I've probably written columns about last episodes of shows, and how some of them, raise such high hopes. Seinfeld's a classic case, I think, of an example of one that just went into the toilet. Of this incredible series that everybody expected so much of the last episode. There's no way that it could match it. The opposite was the Larry Sanders Show on. You ever see the Larry on HBO, which was the last episode was just entirely brilliant. But usually they would give you the last episodes. Not a problem.
In 1985, you won the Pulitzer Prize
Yes.
for television criticism. Talk about that. Did you,
Well, okay. Who ever thought coming from Louisville, Kentucky, I would even think about that? But actually, I had been thinking about it because 2 years before, I think 2 years before, I was in '83. They have the panels and the juries. I forget which is on top, but one of them, the panels, had given me a Pulitzer Prize, and but the jury decided I shouldn't get it because instead of a critic, I was a commentator. So they took me in another category and gave it to Dave Anderson of the, I think it's Dave Anderson of the New York Times. And so I got it. And so people, I never thought about, I mean, my big goal in life when I was younger was to get maybe a headliner award. I ended up getting a couple of headliner awards and that was, I mean, that's a big award. That's great. A Pulitzer, that's, I mean, you know, come on, not me. So, but I thought about it because when there was a story about me getting screwed out of my Pulitzer in '83. People said, "Don't worry, Howard, you'll win it." And I mean, oh, great, I need that kind of pressure, okay. But then Martin Bernheimer, I think, won it the year afterwards for the LA Times, and then I won in '85. It was an enormous thrill. To be honest with you, did I submit stuff that year? I don't know. Maybe I did. I never thought about getting it. And I got it. I was sitting in a restaurant. What is the famous Hollywood restaurant? The oldest restaurant in Hollywood on Hollywood Boulevard.
Lusso and Frank?
Huh? Lusso and Frank's, interviewing Jane Alexander. Okay, I got a call from an editor, Bob Epstein, excuse me. And I picked up the phone, and he said, "Howard, it's my honor to tell you that you won the Pulitzer Award, and Pulitzer Prize." It's like surreal. How do I? And I went back to the table, and I continued the interview, and I don't know if I told her or not. Maybe I did. She was just an incredible, lovely person. Wow, what a gal! I love her. And that was it. And then I came downtown. After I had to finish the interview, I came downtown, and they were all waiting with me for the champagne and stuff like that. And I'm one of these people. I don't know what it says about me. Something bad. I do not do well with praise. So it was a very uncomfortable feeling, being praised. And to be honest with you, I thought I had better years. You know, and the best year I ever had in my life was 1991, and they didn't even enter me. It was the year of the Gulf War, and I think they entered me as a package with Gulf War coverage. They thought we would win that way, and I just did some terrific work that year.
what in particular? What in particular for the Gulf War? We'll go back to the Pulitzer, but what?
On 91?
Yeah.
I wrote a daily column about the war. About war coverage. I mean, a daily column about the war coverage, and really broadened it out to everything. Movies I'd seen, the old movies that reminded me of that. Anything. And a daily column, and it was really, for daily stuff, it was really good, and I think in sci-fi work. Believe me, I've written plenty of shit, but this was really good work. And they decided not to enter me separately, and so I think I went down with their whole package. That's the way it is. But I say that knowing that awards for what they are. I've won some, I've lost some, I've been judges in some. It's totally a crapshoot. Frequently, the people who are most important to a newspaper, most important to anything, never get noted. They're just not in that position. They're not flashy enough. The conditions aren't right. Okay, it's people who do something that's noticed. The time has to be right. There has to be something for you to write about. You have to be at a time where the right judges are there. People who don't resent the West Coast, people who don't resent you personally, people who don't resent the LA Times, and everything has to be right. And what are they saying when you think about it? For 1 year in your goddamn career, okay, 1 year, you were better than everybody else. You could have been a crumb bum the other 30 years, you know. So it is what it is. Am I happy about it? Of course. Is it giving me greater prestige? Absolutely. I love it. But it is what it is. That's it.
Did it do a lot for your career?
Nah. I thought I'd sit by my phone and the phone would be, a few small things. Okay, it got me a big time New York literary agent right away because of that. And it's still okay. not a lot of material things. Even today, okay, people will refer to me in certain ways because of the Pulitzer. Okay, and there are certain things. I have a book now with a co-author who, in many ways, is much smarter and more experienced and brighter than I am, and knows much more about the topic. And then there are times when they want only one of the two of us. It'll be me because I won a Pulitzer. When? In 1985, for Christ's sake. Okay, so in ways like that, it makes a difference. And it's nice. I got a little thing on my wall upstairs.
Well, let's talk about some of your work in 1984 that led
Well,
to that prize.
there are a couple things I remember. I remember one writing about the Olympics, okay, and how jingoistic the Olympics were with Howard Cosell and all this kind of stuff. And they always, the Olympics coverage, and as they always have been ever since, as a matter of fact. And I wrote about that. I think I wrote a column about a political consultant. I don't know. See, I'm afraid to mention this because maybe I'm wrong. I thought there were 10 columns they submitted. Only 3?
Oh, those are the 3 that they had published in a
Oh, maybe they had
subsequent
published,
book,
but I think there were others. I mean, I think one of them also I'd written was about my dad. My dad had died, I think the year before, and I compared my own feelings about my dad's death with how television depicted death. And things have changed so much, I'm happy to say. But at the time, on television, no one paused for death. People died in a series, and the next week they were like they never lived. No one ever paused to mourn, to grieve, or anything. And I compared that with my own father. And I had gone into he was near death, and my father, whom I was never that close to, called me over and gave me I'm starting to choke up now. You had tubes and everything, and it was so anyway. So the point was, I compared the way death was on television, and they ignored death, which is not the case anymore, I'm happy to say. Also, I wrote about the Olympics coverage from ABC. I think also a political consultant in New York. I can't recall the others. There must have been some. I don't recall the other ones that I wrote about.
Well, there was a candidates debate, which was a.
Well, which one? I've written some.
Oh, that was the one. It's a reading of the minds where you were. You had what Tom Brokaw, Walter Mondale, and Jesse Jackson and Gary Hart were actually thinking.
Did I make up the dialogue?
Yes.
Oh
yes.
yeah. Oh yeah. Well, I loved it. Unfortunately, I plagiarized myself many times. I think I've done that sequence. I mean, I love to do that. I always. And in Woody Allen's film Annie Hall, if you've seen Annie Hall, there's a point where there's subtitles, what people are really thinking, and I always thought that would be really great if we could actually do that, and I just had fun doing that, and I think I've done it several times at subsequent debates. I've done the very same thing, and that's just great fun to do, to ridicule them. No, to write about them is just so ludicrous.
Yeah, we're back on.
Yeah.
So I want to ask you just a couple of questions too about just criticism in general. What do you think is the main function of critical writing, in your opinion?
Well, I always thought my main function was to encourage people to think about the television they watch. That was my primary agenda, not the only agenda, primary agenda. Whether you agreed with me or not was not important. Would I love for you to agree with me? Of course. Okay, but that was not important. If even disagreeing with me, you begin thinking about what you're watching, it's important because I think it's dangerous for television to watch right over you. Okay. Also, there is a service component where you're telling people what you think is good, so that those who respect your opinion can be guided by that, and those who don't respect your opinion can be guided by that for the same reason. They might want to watch it because of that. And number 3, I like to entertain people. It's my nature, to do that, and so that was part of it, and God, I wanted to make a living. That was part of it. But the primary reason I felt was just I want to get people to think about television. That may sound pretentious, but that's really what I thought about. And within that, under that umbrella, those other things.
And what would go through your mind as you're watching something in terms of how would you actually process?
Why did I become a doctor? No. When I'm actually watching something, it depends on what it was. There's some things. First of all, I have to tell you that I'm a huge fan of people who do what I think to be really good television, because it's so hard in this business. It is such a struggle. I mean, the odds are so much against you. So if you can get it on the air or on cable, I mean, my hat's off to you. And sometimes I watch things that I think are so good that I become so moved that I tear up. I mean, I can't take it. It's just amazing. So there's that reaction sometimes. There's reaction where I'm watching a comedy and I'm trying to imagine people in a writer's room throwing these ideas around and thinking that they're funny. I mean, I can't. I try to form my mouth and I'll laugh. It won't happen, you know. All sorts of things. Sometimes it's torture. The worst thing about being a television critic, in my opinion, always has been the necessity to watch television you dislike intensely. Okay, anybody else can turn it off, but you're there watching it. It can be very, very painful. Lots of things. Is this slow or is it moving slowly because I'm sleepy? Okay, is this not funny or is it because I'm just in a lousy mood? Those are things I always try to think about too. I think a critic in any performing arts field would also ask himself the same questions.
Do you take notes when you watch?
Oh yeah, oh yes, copious notes, huge notes. So I try to get across to my students. I mean, much more than I'll ever use, and especially on computer. I mean, I take everything, impressions, anything that occurs to me, much of which I will never use, much of which may be negated by what comes later. But it's very important because the notes grow cold and you won't remember it. Okay, but notes are very important, and I would say equally important is organization. Every writer has a different way of writing. I cannot write unless I organize thoroughly, and I have a very distinctive way of organizing. I take my copious notes, I circle them, I give them all topics, I number the topics, then I literally make an outline, 1, 2, 3, 4, and how I'm going to write. And then I write with a blueprint. I frequently change my mind while writing, but that's how I operate. So I've always operated, and that's why when I've had to write in a different way, sometimes write criticism on deadline, I've found it very difficult, very unrewarding.
What are some examples?
Like watching award shows. You're looking for a segue, okay?
Let's talk about that. Let's talk about the Emmy Awards and your coverage.
The
of
Emmy Awards, okay. Well, first of all, one of the responsibilities of being a television critic for the Los Angeles Times, it's like, this might sound crude, but it's like an Auschwitz number on your arm. You must write a review of award shows. It's very important because if you don't, the public will revolt. I mean, the democracy will fall. The republic will fall. That means the Emmys and Oscars, and occasionally MTV, I've done that too, but mainly the Emmys and Oscars. So what happens, first of all, forget about what you think about the awards. The process of writing the review is just horse shit. It's ridiculous. It's meaningless. You have to do it on deadline, very fast deadline. Frequently, the show ends after your deadline, okay? So you're writing thinking of any angle, and your big goal is not to say something meaningful, just not to make a major mistake. A small mistake you can live with, not to say something utterly ludicrous. These are the Oscars when it's actually the Emmys, something like that. Okay, so it's a meaningless exercise that when I was at the Times, argued against year after year after year, and always lost the argument. They felt they had to have a review in the paper. And as the show's going on, you're panicking. You're thinking, my God, what am I going to write about? The host again, I can make a whole review about the host. You're running out of ideas. You have nothing to write about, and you're panicking. Okay, there's that. So the process of writing about them is very difficult, and I think essentially meaningless. Number two, I've never been a fan of the Emmys because I find the Emmys essentially meaningless. I can understand why people would want to watch the Oscars. There's a different aura of movies. But in television, you're watching things you've watched again and again and again. Who cares if somebody wins an Emmy for the 5th time in a row? Who can care except for that person? It becomes just another repetitive exercise, and whose importance I would really challenge. I mean, I'm sure I'm like most people. I can't remember from year to year who's won an Emmy and who hasn't won an Emmy. It sort of gloms together in my mind. So, if that's part of the pain of reviewing them. I don't find them very meaningful, and I don't find the show very meaningful, and therefore it was pretty much of a negative experience for me. Oscars a little better because Oscars are more fun to write about.
What
little
about
bit.
the choice for the Emmy Awards? What about the choices that they ultimately make? Do you often agree with, say,
Well,
the top drama and comedy shows that they win?
okay. It varies. Some years you agree with more, some you don't. And there were times when I was at the Times where I would, go off in a huff and write columns how I agreed. Then I said to myself, Howard, this is not very important stuff. You can find more important stuff to write about than whether you agree whether somebody should or shouldn't. I mean, sometimes I felt the omissions were so egregious that I had to write about them, you know. And it's probably early in my career when there were some shows like on public television I thought were I can think of one. Okay, there was a show you probably never heard of called Riley Ace of Spies. No, blank looks. Okay, incredible piece of work starring Sam Neill before he became pretty well known. It's an amazing show. Okay, that I think I wrote a column about that. But there are some shows that get ignored. The Wire, HBO's The Wire, was a piece of work that I rate right up there with The Sopranos, and totally ignored by the Emmy voters. They tend to be intimidated by large casts, large ensemble casts, because they don't know who to pick, and hence they pick no one. So it's all subjective, but being a critic is subjective. I mean, telling you what's funny, it isn't funny, it's subjective. If you think something is funny and I don't, does that mean you're wrong? If you laugh, it's funny. It's just that simple. So all of this is subjective. And I think as a critic, you always have to keep that in mind. Come on, get a life. It's only your opinion.
Do you think even the organizations themselves, like the Television Academy, are relevant
They even
to the
what?
industry? Are even relevant to the industry?
The Emmys themselves?
The Academy itself,
Well,
the organizations that...
well, sure, on an economic way, and I think there have probably been times when the Emmys have been part of a gathering of momentum that can really help a show. Okay, there's some shows that haven't been doing well that they get Emmys, and I think they can help people's careers. That's great to have on your resume, Emmy winning and get roles. Other than that, I'm not sure. I don't think in the way that an Oscar can.
Do you think that's part of it is because television is more ephemeral, or
Maybe, yeah, probably so. That is, and then that's also why I think that the Oscars are more popular. I mean, to me, the Emmys, I don't know, they're like a piece of furniture. Television is more like a piece of furniture. It's in your house every day. You see it every day. It's not that big a deal.
okay? What about the industry itself?
Yeah.
Have you had a lot of dealings with the people in the industry? Have they tried to influence you in any way, or
Well,
or
I
deal with
don't. I mean, people try to influence you in a certain way. I let it be known. I think it was rather obvious early in my career. Okay, I was not one of those people who could be easily, I don't know, a pat on the shoulders. It wasn't going to work. Okay, I never liked to talk to publicists much, even though there are some publicists in a small minority that are really good, and whose opinion you seek and you value. Okay, but most of the time I didn't want to talk to them. I didn't want to talk to people whose work I would write about. Consequently, I made it a practice not to hang out. There are a lot of people who like to hang out in Hollywood parties, make friends with these people, go out to lunch. I rarely did that, number one, because I don't like to do it. But number two, I thought it was a dangerous thing to do because it's easily become co-opted. And even if you don't do it, you can still become co-opted because at some level you're going to run into somebody, you may like them, and then if you like them and you write about them, what are you going to do? It happens. You cannot avoid it. I can't think of a time. I mean, you always wonder if somebody calls and says, "Hey, great piece, Howard." They're doing it because they really think it's a great piece, or they really think that they really want you to write something nice about them next time. You don't know. So it's easy to become very skeptical, even cynical about it sometimes.
Do you think that a lot of other critics too have issues with the possibility of maybe that they would want to be on the other side of the
Well, I think I think it's possible. There have been times, for example, not even critics, people writing about entertainment, occasionally critics, working for the LA Times who have had an interest in becoming part of the business, and on occasion, I think they've crossed that line and soliciting people while they were actually covering them, and I think that's a conflict of interest. That should be a firing offense, But I'm sure there are people who do this to make contacts. They think they'll do this and they'll make contacts, and if you do that, then you're less likely to write objectively about these people. I'm sure there are. I'd be surprised because there have been people who have become part of the business, become big parts of the business. So inevitably, they've used it as a stepping stone. I don't think a critic should do that. I think it's very dangerous.
What about the LA Times itself? Have you ever been edited to the point that it... No?
No, on only 2 occasions, okay, did anybody ever come to me and even question, okay? Once, got early in my career, this is before, when I had written, this might have been before I was actually the critic, when I was still a critic in waiting, when I wrote a piece critical of some kind of golf coverage. It was at Benign. And Aline McMinn came up to me, bless her heart, and reminded me that the publisher was a fan of golf. I don't know, what was I supposed to do? Go away all contrite? I don't know. That, and something much, much later, when I was writing a piece on political coverage. One of the things I used to do as a television critic was do a lot of coverage of politics, political coverage, go to conventions, etc. And I wrote a piece critical, some kind of general piece critical of convention coverage, and also had a paragraph in there that was critical of the LA Times, doing something, I can't recall what it was. Okay, the editor at the time, Shelby Coffey, got me on the phone and was quite mad at me because he felt I'd been unfair, and it went no further than that. But that was it. It went in. That was all there was to it. That's the only time, and that's the kind of thing that can put a chill on you. But I can tell you, I've been blessed with being given just complete autonomy. I mean, I could do everything but endorse presidents. I mean, it's outrageous, the autonomy I've been given. So I've been really blessed. Nobody has really tried to interfere with my work, and if there have been complaints, they've shielded me from them. So no. And it wouldn't have made a difference. I don't know what I would have done when I was early in my career, when I was trying to get established, if I would have bowed to that kind of pressure. I don't know. As I got older, more experienced, and got more clout, I mean, I would resign before I would give in to that kind of pressure. I wouldn't do it.
Did you ever test the waters? Was something you knew could be
No, I've never tested the waters. I've gotten job opportunities, offers while I've been here at the LA Times, but it was one was to stay in town. But no, I've never. I mean, I had a great job. I wouldn't have, if somebody had come to me and said, and everybody, the New York Times was the #1 paper, come be the TV critic for the New York Times, I wouldn't have done it. Not because I don't respect the New York Times. I liked my job better than the job of being TV critic for the LA Times. The LA Times has never given much latitude to their television critics. Here they do.
What prompted you to retire?
To what?
What prompted you to retire from the LA Times?
My hearing went bad. What prompted me to retire? 80% of which was I was just burned out. Television had consumed my entire life. I was getting tired of writing about it. I felt like I wasn't being fair to some of the things I was being asked to write about. Increasingly, there are these reality shows, which instinctively I really disliked.
Why?
I just didn't find them interesting. I just found them not only derivative, of course they're derivative, but incredibly dopey and mainly dishonest. I mean, it's not reality. In no way is it reality. And basically it's an extension of something that was happening happened in television many, many years before. I mean, that's as antecedents. But okay, so I was burned out. Didn't want to do it anymore. And 20%, I didn't like the new management that was coming in. This is not the Zell management. The management that preceded them. They'd come in. They had these people who came in from the New York Times, and I felt they were on a different page. And who knows? They might have gotten rid of me. At a certain point, they were getting rid of people who made a lot more money than people they could hire that were cheaper. But I left because I wanted to leave, and I thought it was a good time to leave, and that was it. And I had this sort of idyllic dream of what I would do with the rest of my life, which didn't quite pan out. I would sit in my office and write mystery novels, sort of like Murder, She Wrote, with music in the background, da 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 da, and right off into the sunset. Didn't quite work that way, but what the hell.
So what are you doing now?
What am I doing now? Okay, I'm still writing, and I teach at USC, which takes a lot of my time, and primarily that's it. But it's turned out to be like a full-time job, and I still write a monthly column for the LA Times. So essentially, I need to retire from retirement because I work essentially full-time. I work real hard, and that's it. But my dream would be just to sit and write fiction, murder fiction.
And you said you're writing a column for the.
I'm sorry?
And you said you're writing a column for the Los Angeles.
I write a
Times.
column about news media for the LA Times. I pitched them to do it. They did not pitch me. And I did it because, number one, I didn't think at the time was writing much about news coverage of the election. Somewhat, but they weren't doing it. And so I pitched them on doing it, and I said I would do it on the cheap. I wasn't doing it for the money, monthly, and partly, and I was very honest, I wanted to do it because I thought there was a need, and partly because I thought it would help promote my new book, to have my name in the public. I was honest about it. Okay, and so that's why I started doing it, and something that, and bothers me, and I blame myself for this. And even though I emphasized it very strongly when I was at the LA Times, apparently I did not make a strong enough case about the importance of writing about local news, because when I left, it just dropped off the end of the earth. No one finds it even important. I think it's enormous miscalculation on the part of the LA Times, because local news, survey after survey shows that still most people get their primary news source is local news. And these people are as big of celebrities as Hollywood celebrities are to their audiences. But the LA Times just doesn't see it that way. What can I do?
What do you think the repercussions of something like that are?
That they can do whatever they want. I mean, I really, I really tried my best to hold their feet to the fire, and I hope they burn their feet off. They deserved it. I have mostly contempt for what goes on in local news. Anyway, I don't claim to be unbiased. Okay, and somebody has to write about the shenanigans, the dishonesty, the self-serving behavior that goes on there day after day after day after day. In many ways now in 24-hour news on cable too.
Do you believe that about national news too?
Well, I do on cable news. Absolutely, I could. I could go into detail that would have us here for 3 days about my feelings about cable news and how much of it is self-serving, and how they have taken what began in television news in its early days, and that is building newscasts around celebrities and making you want to watch news because of the celebrity, not because of the news. And cable news has exacerbated that to an enormous degree, to a very destructive degree, especially on cable news, especially on 24-hour news, especially on CNN. I mean, if you look at, Anderson Cooper, I mean, please. I mean, the guy, I'm surprised he can even accommodate his head in the studio. It's just, when the messenger becomes bigger than the message, we're in big trouble. And I think that to a large degree, that's what's happened with television news especially. Does it happen occasionally in print news and newspaper news? Of course it does, but not to the extent of television, which is built around personalities, which is largely an extension of entertainment.
Do you think anyone is doing it right in news?
Television news? Closer to being right, sure. But to me, the best newscast on television, even though it can get tedious at some time, is the Lear News Hour on PBS. They're constricted by their budget, and occasionally they can talking head you to death. Your eyes get very heavy, your lids get very heavy, but day in, day out, they do the best job of covering news on television than anywhere in the country that I know of. Maybe I've missed something. I don't think I have. There are pockets of good coverage times that I'm elsewhere, and our radio would be NPR. I'm a big fan of NPR, but the audience for the Lear News Hour is old and getting older, and the whole texture of news has changed enormously. The news audience has changed enormously. The news itself has changed enormously. The delivery of news has changed enormously, and that is largely because of television, and even more so the internet, which is changing even 24-hour news. And the internet is even faster than 24-hour news. How do you get faster than live? You predict the news before it happens, and that's what they're doing.
And you talk about that in your book.
Yes, I do. Oh, you caught me. Okay.
Well, talk a little about that book, No Time to Think.
Well, it's an extension of what I and my co-author Charles Feldman have been thinking for a long time, and that is media today is moving so fast, so dangerously fast that there is no time to think. That it's moving faster than the speed of thought, and when that happens, it's incredibly dangerous. And it's not doesn't apply to only geezers like us; it applies to everybody. And when the news moves that fast, then it's dangerous because it affects not only those of us on the pavement, the media themselves, but also our national leaders who are under increasing pressure to make decisions faster and faster and faster. And you hope they will have the discipline to be cautious. And perhaps with Barack Obama, that would be the case because he appears to be a cautious man. But you never know. The pressure can build enormously for you to make precipitous decisions, and that's very dangerous. And it's because, on the internet today, I mean, anybody can be a journalist, and then that's always been the case. Anybody can be a journalist, but there are good journalists and bad journalists. And I would suggest to you that most of the people today who define themselves as journalists, i.e., bloggers, are not good journalists. They're people who think only of the moment, who do not hesitate to put anything they hear right on the internet, and then just hope that somebody will correct it in 2 or 3 days. And I think it's very dangerous.
What about in terms of a major national event? Some of the ones
Major national what?
National event.
Like what do you mean, for example?
The Challenger disaster, or
well, okay. I think for example, like 9/11, the Challenger disaster, raging wildfires, earthquake. There are times when live television and the internet are indispensable. You ain't gonna wait for your morning paper, that's for sure. You'll turn on radio, turn on television, go to the internet. It's dispensable, and that in that way the technology works in our behalf. Technology is wonderful when it works for you. Okay, it's very dangerous when it works against you, and when it works against you is when you employ it only because you have it, and because you're trying to amortize the cost of having it. But there are times when it's indispensable. I mean, 9/11, my God, I mean, live television was amazing, and there's a great skill there. There's a difference between a skillful television reporter and a skillful television reporter who is good live. They're different skills, and some of them are remarkably good, and I salute them for doing it. But by and large, that kind of reporting is done as a gimmick to hook viewers, not for any good journalistic reason. And that's my quarrel with it. And it's increasingly so because of the internet. And as it becomes more and more our reality, the more and more we become desensitized to it and think of it as the norm. And that's the danger.
What about media consolidation itself? The fact that
I think media consolidation, going to all my old columns, media consolidation is dangerous. I think whenever you consolidate more and more power in fewer hands, as a general principle, I think it's dangerous. I mean, you're counting on enlightenment when it may not exist, and it's fewer voices, fewer opinions, fewer eyes. I think that's always dangerous, and that's the way we're going in this country also, not only in media, but just in all of industry. As a principle, I think it's dangerous, and I think it's been harmful. I think when you have more and more newspapers owned by a single company, when you have more and more newspapers and television stations owned by a single company, it's dangerous. When you have more and more of the media themselves owned by a single company, that to me is dangerous. I think, even though I'm in favor of a strong federal government, I think media consolidation does not work in general, does not work in behalf of the public.
What I'd like to do is, and you just did it really within news, but I'd also like to take you through some other genres
of course,
in terms of what you've done
anything
over the years.
Anything you want.
Okay, let's just start with sports.
Yeah.
And what you've seen, what kind of changes you've seen, televised sports over the years, and how you've covered it professionally.
Well, okay. I'm trying to have sports. In general, well, there's different kind of sports coverage. There's coverage of live sports, which television usually does well. Again, when it doesn't let technology get in the way. If this is getting too arcane for you, let me know. Okay, but I can call your attention to coverage of football games, where they had this thing called instant replay, which initially was developed to show you something, a really unusual play. And frequently now, you get instant replay to death. They're showing you an instant replay of something that happened previously when live action is happening, that kind of thing. But in general, the coverage of live action sports is good. Television reporting, the status of television reporting has always been very low. Because I think largely the people who cover sports on television think of themselves as extensions of the industry they're covering. They're themselves celebrities. They probably have the same agents. They're buddies with the athletes they cover, and so they're all a bunch of guys together. So, they think of it as a big game when it's not a big game. It's a huge, huge industry, and it should be covered as such, as you would cover any big industry, as you would cover the government. You should cover it with great scrutiny, but they don't. So I think the level of sports recording in general, with some exceptions, in general, has not been good. What other areas?
What
of
about
sport?
big events like the Super Bowl? How did that change from when you started to now? And how it's
I feel like I
stature?
planted questions. It's a Super Bowl. Well, for number one, I've never been a fan of the Super Bowl. Well, I'm not a fan of Super Bowl. Super Bowl is one of the great marketing successes I've ever seen in my life. It's amazing. The first thing they did, which was really smart, was give it Roman numerals, which made it seem like it was something handed down to Moses on the Mount. So you had to watch it, right? And I think it's just something that it's been sold. It is what it is. It's been sold to the American public as something that America needs to watch. So now they do it not because they especially are interested in television, because it's become a national event. It's become something people do. It's an amazing phenomenon, the Super Bowl. If you go back to its roots, it just started off as two teams playing football, and now it's just a national phenomenon. Probably more than the World Series. And the World Series is really part of America. The Super Bowl is a relative newcomer. So, and it's like everything else is overdone. Everything on television ultimately is overdone. The commercials are overdone. The coverage is overdone. The hype is enormous. And the people covering it constantly complain about the hype while doing the hype. It's very hypocritical, because they are the very part of the very hype that they complain, how can you guys stand this? I'd be bored to tears. I'm sorry. I had to do it. Okay. It's overdone. It's overblown.
Okay, you were named an ESPN Sports Media Critic in '84.
Okay. Yes. Okay. It was on a show. It makes me sound like I worked on all of ESPN. It was a show on ESPN. Roy Firestone was the host. What the hell was the name of that show? Okay, what I would do, it taught me a lot about television, by the way. I would come on and critique sports on television. Okay, so they would give me, I would have maybe 2 minutes, 90 seconds, I don't know. And I was part of a show, and I would come on, and the purpose was not to convey any information. The purpose was just to say something snappy, and I would just hope to get off without screwing up. And that's something else that taught me about television. It was just, you're there to fill space. I was there to fill time. I had a good title. I think even then I was the Pulitzer Prize winning critic for the LA Times, which looked good for them. And I would do something on television, and I wasn't particularly good on television, I don't think, because I was constantly worried about time. Because I knew I didn't have much time. So you have to say something really smart about something in particular in about 90 seconds. And also the host, Roy Firestone, who was a very bright guy, who was the kind of person with 10 seconds left will ask you some monumental question, like, is there a God or something? You have 10, what do you do? But it did teach me a lot about television, and for that I was very grateful.
And was it reflected in your writings that you would do?
I think on some level it had to be, okay. Because I'm sure I've written this a lot of television just filling time until the commercials get around, and now it's even worse than that. And now on 24-hour news, it's really filling time, shoveling it in. So on that level, I think it did. And it helps teaching you about the industry. I mean, a criticism leveled at me, as I'm sure it is leveled at every critic, is that, hey, Have you ever been a newscaster? Have you ever produced a show? And the answer is absolutely not. And I'm sure I'd be smarter about it if I did, but I haven't. But you could say that about, does that mean that disqualifies everybody? Does that disqualify the viewer at home from being critical of television? He or she has not produced a show? No.
Have you ever thought about that? Have you ever, with all of your knowledge, have you ever thought this is what the show should be, or that have a?
Oh, I mean,
I
have thoughts about I have thoughts about the way things should be, and I've always felt that a critic's job was to reflect what was on the air, not what was not on the air. Okay, to write about that. So I think that's a dangerous thing to fall into. But sure, and from time to time, I'm sure I've imposed my views, some of which might have been cockeyed. And I think I've done columns. I've done mock columns. That's right, I have. That's right. Advising the industry on what to do with their time. They never took any of my advice. Sure. And when I first came out here, okay, first year, maybe, I thought maybe I'd like to write comedy. And in the morning, I would sort of do stuff. I never approached anybody. Nothing ever came of it because it was something I would never want to do in my worst dreams. I can't think of a worse job. It's such a hard business. I wouldn't want to do it.
Did you write a spec script?
I didn't know. I never wrote a script. I wrote spec scripts to myself.
Right.
Okay, comedy, wrote stuff, but I never.
Yeah. I'm just curious what shows you.
I don't remember. I really don't remember what I was liking at the time. But it probably wasn't. They were probably terrible because I didn't understand the structure at the time. But I did. But I swiftly fell out of love with the whole concept of writing for television.
Well, let's talk a little bit about sitcoms and comedies in general throughout your career.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of trends have you seen within the comedy genre?
Okay. Well, I mean, we had the trend toward live action sitcoms in front of audiences, the 3-camera, even the 4-camera. Then we went to the single camera, which I happen to like better. And also over the last 15 years, we've had what I consider to be a very negative trend in comedy, and that is comedies built around stand-up comics, in which you take a comedian and try to make a sitcom around his or her routine, and it might work for 2 or 3 episodes, and then you literally run out of things to write about. And I think it's I think it's also made television much more one-liner oriented, as opposed to comedy concept oriented, as opposed to earlier comedies. Now, if you find these funny, then I'm wrong. If you laugh, then it's funny to you. But to me, many of these have not been as funny. It could be my own taste of change. I don't know.
What about the tone of comedies in general?
Well, I mean, what do you mean exactly? If you can define what you mean more, the tone.
The tone of like going from, say, a Leave It to Beaver to a Married with Children, how that has changed over the years.
Gee, are they different? Well, Married with Children was a send-up of sitcoms. I mean, so it had a certain tone. I mean, they become stronger. The humor has become much more ribald as television has responded to cable. Mainstream television, commercial television has responded to cable. There's more sexual content. Sometimes I think gratuitous. I'm in no way approve, but a lot of it to me is gratuitous. We can do it now, so we can do it. Let's do it. I think I'm trying to think. The comedies. I love the comedies. A lot of the comedies on HBO and Showtime. I mean, it depends on your taste in comedies, in which they really do push the envelope. Curb Your Enthusiasm, I think, is just amazing. Larry Sanders was amazing, and there have been there are others which I think are terrific comedies. But I think in general, comedies and commercial television, mainstream commercial television, are not as funny as they once were, because I don't find them as funny.
Okay, let's stop there to